Hey everybody, this is Vince, and this is a segment I like to call Books You Should Know About. I'll probably just call it book summaries. It's not as catchy, but get straight to the point. Anyway, today we're looking at The Cross and the Lynching Tree by James Cone. There are two things Cone's trying to do here. First, he struggled with this question all of his life, was like, how did blacks live? Life wasn't just not easy, but in a lot of respects, it was horrifying. And you were always in fear that at any moment you could do the wrong thing, look at a white person the wrong way, or even for no reason at all, the white person they had a bad day and they got mad, and all of a sudden you're hanging from a tree with white children laughing and cutting pieces off of you while others stood around and took pictures. So it's this horrible outlook, and Cone's tried to figure out, where is it that these black people, like his mother and his father, found strength to keep on going? The conclusion Cone came to, and that seems to be the reason for writing this book, is that it was their religion and primarily the cross that helped them through. A second reason for writing this book is for reconciliatory purposes, and that is white America has to be able to see this analogy as clearly as black America in order for there to be reconciliation. So that would be Cone's point. Christianity and America will never be able to move past the horrors of slavery and white supremacy until white Christians can see the similarities between the cross and the lynching tree. He says, until we see the cross and lynching tree together, until we can identify Christ with the re-crucified black body hanging from the lynching tree, there can be no genuine understanding of Christian identity in America, and no deliverance from the brutal legacy of slavery and white supremacy. So we might ponder this point, because what America's trying to do, at least this is my opinion, is that we said, well, just forget about slavery, forget about segregation, we're going to move past it like it never happened. And you think, well, that's terrific, let's do that, that's a great strategy. If we could also erase all of the hate that produced it, right? So as Cone notes, what do we think happened behind to all the hate that was behind the lynchings when lynching was made illegal? Like, where did it all go? Did everyone just say, oh, well, now lynching is illegal, better love our black brothers and sisters? Right? Obviously, the hate is still there, so we can't just move past it. We can't just forget it and shut it off. Instead, what we need to do, Cone suggests, is to accept the suffering of black people for what it was, a oneness with Jesus, who was also lynched by a powerful majority. Cone says, the real scandal of the gospel is this: humanity's salvation is revealed in the cross of the condemned criminal Jesus, and humanity's salvation is available only through our solidarity with the crucified people in our midst. And this is not just limited to black people. He's saying for there to be reconciliation between black people and white people, we need to be able to see the cross and the lynching tree as one. However, in a broader sense, what he's saying is Christianity itself can't be reconciled with each other until we can all agree on what the cross means. It's an instrument of torture that shows that God identifies with the suffering, especially those who suffer at the hands of the religious elite and the hands of the power of the majority. So it's not just the lynching tree, but it's also the gas chambers of the concentration camps, and it's the fires that burn the gay and lesbian, and it's all of these things and these hateful things that the minorities experience at the hands of the powerful majority. That's what the cross is. Okay. So here's how the book is laid out. In the first chapter, Cone relates the atrocities done to black people, often very graphic, and he describes the lynchings and the utter hopelessness of the black population, but also how the whites reacted, celebrating it, taking days off work and off of school to go see the lynching, taking pictures with the lynched or the cut up bodies so they could send it to friends. Here he gives an answer to his first question, and that is, how did blacks deal with this? They found strength to go on living in their music, specifically the blues, and also in their religion. He says black people identified with Jacob, who wrestled with his opponent until he got a blessing and found meaning. He said black people identify with Simon of Cyrene, who's often understood in the black community as a black man who carried the cross of Jesus. And of course, they also identified with Jesus. He says The cross places God in the midst of crucified people, in the midst of people who are hung, shot, burned, and tortured. One major question he introduces in this chapter, and he'll spend a lot more time on this in the next chapter, is how white people, or at least those who perpetrated hate against blacks, but especially in the lynchings, could have identified as Christians, and in fact could have many times justified it by Christianity. In fact, as he mentions, it was not uncommon for lynchings to be done on church grounds. So he gives a pretty solid answer for this in chapter 2. He deals with a famous theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr. One gets the feeling that he could have used any theologian, but he chose Niebuhr because of Niebuhr's particular theology. Niebuhr taught that the cross is central, not only to Christianity, but to all of human history. The cross is the symbol of God being on the side of and lifting up the powerless. To Niebuhr, the cross condemns the powerful and shows a God who is strong only in his weakness. So this sounds like black theology, right? It sounds like his next step would be to say, look how Christ is present at the lynchings of black people. His next logical step would be to embrace black theology. But he doesn't. In fact, he seems to side with white Southerners on many issues, or at least he placates them. So this chapter can be seen as an attack on Niebuhr, and don't get me wrong, it is. But it's not just attacking Niebuhr just to do it. Cone is saying that Niebuhr had all these opportunities to engage with black theology. He had the perfect theology for it, but he didn't do it. So, like the question is, how much worse is it for all other white theologians? And when I say white theologians, I pretty much mean all theologians, right? All theology is this white, Eurocentric thought process. It's a condemnation of all white theologians and suggests that the reason for misinterpreting the cross among white Christians is because we're not getting anything from our academic higher-ups. The next chapter, chapter 3, talks about Martin Luther King Jr., and what Cone is doing here is he's really contrasting King with Niebuhr. He's showing what Niebuhr could have been if he would have embraced the black theology of the cross, because Niebuhr and King had the same kind of theology, but King actually lived his out. Cone says, like Reinhold Niebuhr, whom he studied in graduate school, King believed that the cross was the defining heart of the Christian faith. Unlike Niebuhr, his understanding of the cross was inflected by his awareness of the lynching tree, and this was a significant difference. One of the reasons this made King a better theologian, in Cone's opinion, is because to Cone, theology is not just saying smart things, but living them out. In fact, later in a lecture at Yale Divinity School, Cone had said that he was asked who the greatest 20th century theologian was. And he said, at first I wanted to say James Baldwin, but then I said, no, it's King, because theology is not just writing, but it's living. Niebuhr's problem was that he had these great words, but he did not live them out, in Cone's opinion, because while he talked about being on the side of the oppressed, he dismissed the black experience. Cone says that by being informed about the suffering of blacks and using that in his interpretation of Christ, King was able to experience and share the love of the cross more fully. And this includes, by the way, love of even white people that persecuted blacks. Cone says, for King, nonviolence was more than a strategy. It was the way of life defined by love for others, the only way to heal broken humanity. The next two chapters, chapters 4 and 5, they kind of run together. Remember, the premise is that theology has been done wrong, and it's centered on the wrong things, especially concerning the cross. So who got it right? Well, in chapter 4, Cone talks about the poets, the songwriters, the artists. They're the ones who got it right. And in chapter 5, he includes black women into this. Cone asks, what enabled artists to see what Christian theologians and ministers would not? What prevented these theologians and ministers who should have been the first to see God's revelation of black suffering from recognizing the obvious gospel truth? His answer is that theologians lacked the imagination to see it. Also, they were too tied up in social opinion and probably just wanted to stay alive. But the artist is the prophet. the artist, and that can be the painter or the sculptor or the writer, was able to see the redemption in the suffering of the world. They were able to hold faith and doubt together, live in doubt, but then lead people out into hope. Theologians lived in some ethereal plane, far from the everyday world, where their ideas sound great, but they have little practical grounding. The artists, they saw the real world and were able to bring out of it redemption and hope. This was the same with black women. Lynching was primarily reserved for black men, though some black women were lynched, but primarily the offense against black women was the harm done with the fathers and husbands and leaving them behind, right? But also in the beatings that they took, and also violence that they sometimes took because their husbands ran. Black women were not afforded the luxury of running. They had a family to look after. And so they were forced, even more than anyone else, to either find hope or to find despair. And what Cone found is that they often did find hope in their faith in the cross. So Cone quotes Dwight Moody in saying, "Our American Christians are too busy saving the souls of white Christians from burning in hellfire to save the lives of black ones from present burning in the fires kindled by white Christians." And then Cone later says, "Through their actions, women expressed the conviction that their nonviolent suffering could save not only the black community from white supremacy, but even save America from its worst self." So what he's saying is that while like nothing's bothering the white Christian, and so they're all concentrated on this, let's leave this life and go somewhere else, since we're going to save people to go to heaven. Black people, especially black women, didn't have that luxury. And so they're looking more towards what's the hope coming out of my situation right now. And so they see their nonviolent suffering as salvation, not just for the black community, but for all of America. So there you have it. That's The Cross and Lynching Tree, a very powerful book, and in my opinion, a very practical book, and very much a life-changing book, and certainly a book you should know about. See, that's my title. Anyway.